the same place as the recording of the previous meeting. Okay, all set. So thanks for joining, and this is our second meeting to discuss the differences and similarities between the CNCF telco activities and Anuket. And in the previous meeting, we agreed that we will check what are the main goals of Anuket and the CNCF telecom activities. I don't know if there is a better name for this in CNCF, but I think that describes it pretty well. The CNCF, the Anuket side, I think we discussed a bit already in the previous meeting. So Anuket would like to achieve quote unquote standard content infrastructures in this case and applications. So and this standardization would mean that the integration cost of these two is cheap, and we are doing this by creating the reference model and the reference architectures, the reference implementations to ensure that whatever is defined in the reference architecture is buildable, and then the reference conformance test to test both the infrastructure side and the application side. And of course, we have lots of other projects around these which are helping these projects to achieve their targets. So we have, of course, lots of projects around testing. We have deployment projects, and that is. Did I miss anything? Or was this a correct recap of the target of Anuket?
I think you're spot on, Gergely.
Okay, thank you. Then let's cover a bit CNCF. What is the goal of all of these telecom activities in CNCF? Taylor or Lucina, if you can talk about this a bit.
Yeah. So, are we just given a quick overview first and then go into more?
Yeah, that's
Right.
that's good, because maybe somebody is missing one or two of these projects.
Sounds good. We actually created some slides and other material just to talk about the whole program, but one of them is the goals. So I guess one of the first things is to have a open source self-service certification and program that's focused on the telecom industry needs, like specifically trying to address those needs from a with regards to adopting cloud native technology. So validating the cloud nativeness of networking applications, and then certifying cloud native network functions. I think that would summarize everything. Right now, I would, yeah, okay, that's fine. Go ahead, Gergely, you're good.
No, I think that's it. So I think that is clear. You say that you are trying to address the telecom industry's needs. So I think there is a big overlap between what we are doing in Anuket and what is done in CNCF, because we are also trying to address the telecom industry's needs. Um, can we just go through on the overview? So what kind of projects and activities do you have, and how these are interlinked?
Could we define overlap too versus, parallel or complementary efforts? Because I have lots of needs. So I feel like there's probably lots of work that could be doled out to make Jeffrey happy.
Yeah, I wouldn't say all the needs for sure. So from the CNCF side, it's focused on the highest level, which is probably still too general, Jeffrey, is adoption of cloud native technology and methodologies. So not just the technology. So people could say, I'm using all of this, but the differentiation, I think, is more important around the methodologies and best practice in utilizing those technologies. That's probably the bigger concern, or I won't even say concern. The bigger focus is in that. So how to best utilize all of these technologies. And from my perspective, and I would say a lot of folks, it's understanding the principles behind it and the methodologies that come out of that, because methodologies come from principles, and then you have best practices based on those methodologies. And that's what we're trying to see. How do you utilize all of that? And of course,
Sorry, just
Jeffrey,
one
I know we
second.
could get even more detailed, Jeffrey, but trying to keep it high level for a little bit. But if you have any thoughts, go ahead, Gergely.
Sorry, just one small interruption. There is a hand raised by Lincoln.
Yeah, I was just going to try to summarize some of what I heard from Taylor's explanation, where it seems like it's a more of a focus on the compliance or the conformance aspect. You specifically mentioned cloud nativeness, of an application or the workload. Whereas I think the important difference that I see in some of what's being talked about in Anuket is the relation of the workload to the infrastructure, and where it can actually run, and having some interoperability or ability to share that infrastructure underneath it. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that right, and if those are kind of where some of the demarcation of the goals or the focus comes from between the two different kind of groups and their activities.
As you were saying, just the first half, it popped in my head. Okay, what is our goal with not just adopting cloud native, not adopting cloud natives? Why are you doing that? Well, so interoperability was immediately what I was saying, and then a few seconds later you said that. So I would say that's a complementary goal. Interoperability is a big thing within CNCF. I mean, Kubernetes conformance is specifically about that. The difference is that's one, I'll say, product, and that's the baseline Kubernetes. Then, of course, you have hundreds of different, probably thousands now, of different flavors of Kubernetes. In my view, Anuket is a flavor of Kubernetes, or a distribution. If you're thinking like operating system, it's a distribution of Kubernetes that starts expanding on it, and you add additional things. But that base Kubernetes underneath Anuket, you want to make sure that it's compatible. So Anuket runs the Kubernetes conformance test. It's part of RC2. So what CNCF is doing on the CNF certification is something similar, currently focused primarily on applications. So this would be application interoperability with the platform. So that would be Kubernetes, and with each other. So if you have 10 vendors all working, all supplying products, and a CSP is consuming those, they're gonna build service chains, or whatever you want to say, different workloads that combine these. We want to encourage encourage compatibility, also automation, of the infrastructure, the whole operational life cycle. So that's baseline though, similar to Kubernetes conformance, that baseline interoperability. And then someone else can come on and say, we have all these other pieces that will help the service providers that choose these specific pieces. If they follow these standards, they're even more compatible as a add-on. I hope that was clear.
Just one clarification, and maybe that also is a question. So in Anuket, we have the reference implementation 2, which is, yes, a Kubernetes distro, but we have RA2 and RC2, which are a bit more broad than these. So RA2 is basically a specification of how a Kubernetes is now, like basic, no, it's a specification of what a Kubernetes distro should be able to do, like what features should be there, and RC2 is to verify those. So I think in this sense, Anuket is more than just a distro. It is a specification of features.
I think just the term.
Yeah,
reference
well, I was going to say it's
architecture.
probably the expectations of a distro. We have an example implementation, and then we have a series of tests to test other implementations, including those that come likely from corporate entities. Because I'm not sure people are necessarily going to download RI2 and then package that as their corporate distro, although they might, but it's an integration activity that we do to ensure that the RA requirements are implementable. And then we have a test suite that can test anyone's implementation against the requirements from RA. I think is sort of the words you were kind of looking for. I just had some caffeine, so I can put words together. We're very proud. But Gergely and other Anuket folks, does that sound about right?
I think that is right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, Heather. And I'm going to go back to the operating system distribution. There are distributions that have reference architectures basically and requirements and everything else. And then there are flavors of those. And if you dug into, say, Debian Linux, you're going to actually see a lot of specs underlying, and some of them go back to even more base level specs that there's only distributions that are usable that are very minimal out of the Linux specifications that are even shared to, I would say, even some influence on Red Hat. But then if you go further down the line, then you have Ubuntu and all these others, which still pull, even now, some from Debian and for sure started. And it seems like right now, that's what the type of thing that Anuket is. And maybe there's going to be other RIs equivalent. And then, of course, there's all the ones, I think, like you're saying, Heather, where someone may come in and say, we're going to look at the reference, but we're building our own. We're not going to take any of the RI, but we're going to follow the standards and be able to run the RC test.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you did that sort of, that Debian, Ubuntu, sort of comparison, Anuket would be doing the work on Ubuntu, which makes sense because Debian, that would be doing the work on something like Debian. Debian is a pure open source type, I guess, initiative. And then Ubuntu is an open source licensed distro created by an open source community organization, so or company, I guess.
I would say too, like, since we're using this analogy, like,
and it may break down, but it's working for right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
No, it's fine. Let's continue with this. So, like, I think another big difference, right, is we're not doing architectures in our group. We're looking at how software is designed, implemented, and managed, right? So does your software scale horizontally? Does it have like traditional SLAs, or is it capable of being deployed in a cloud with the assumption that there's on-demand resources and you can recover? So using the distro thing, like if you guys are working on a flavor of Debian, if you will, you guys are rocking Ubuntu, we're making sure that the people who wrote their own word processor on top of it actually adhere to open source standards, that the licenses are open source, that it's built to work in an open source ecosystem, versus trying to, get into the weeds on how Ubuntu itself was designed. We just want to know that, like, if a flavor like Ubuntu exists, that the software on top of it is running in an open manner and it meets those open source paradigms.
Yeah, and I would think that Anuket's a little bit more concerned with ensuring that the word processing program, for example, runs easily and well on top of that operating system. If we're going to continue this analogy, which
I would add to what you're saying, Heather, and just say Anuket seems to care about from all the way back to the very initial concerns and needs of the end users, all the way to the end of user expectations of how to, are you going to use a doorknob, or are you going to use a door pull, or what are you going to have on here? Like you'll have some, you're looking into the whole thing from start to finish. And that's why you have the requirements, the architecture, the reference implementation, and the testing. You're looking at doing some of the whole thing.
Yes, that is correct.
CNCF is not looking at doing all of that. So there's no distribution that's trying to, CNCF doesn't want to say this is the Kubernetes distribution. CNCF doesn't want to say this is the type of door that you need to put on your house or anything else. They go, here's 5 different ones, and here's the benefits and pros and cons of each, and so forth. Now they may say, we found that if you put your door handles at the top of the door or at the bottom right next to the floor, it doesn't work out too well. Let's make sure it's right here in
certainly for someone of my height, the top of the door handle is a disaster, but
it would be a disaster. You'd be stuck in the room.
When my roommate's annoyed with me, he puts all the coffee mugs on the top shelf in the kitchen. Not that y'all needed to know that, but yeah, but I actually do think we're getting somewhere here too with some of the collaboration and revisiting, I think, sort of our collaborative engagement too, which is I think you were pointing out that there's sort of a kind of broader sort of Anuket interest and a very deep dive interest in CNCF. And I think that sort of having a deep dive for the different parts of that broader system are how we meet all the needs. And that kind of goes to the, maybe Jeffrey's original comment of there's a lot of work. Let's parcel it out to get it done, kind of comment as well across expertise and humans willing to do work.
Exactly. Okay, then can we do this overview of the different activities in CNCF just to get some kind of a picture of these quickly? Taylor even mentioned the slide.
Yeah, the slides are more of kind of to flow through, giving an update on what is the certification. Do you want me to jump into that?
Yes, I think that is it.
Can you give me a presentation capability?
Well, I want to. I'm not sure if I can.
Somebody?
I can.
Do you need to?
Yes, I need to. You are a presenter now.
All right. Let me see.
And I can.
All right, 1 second. I gotta restart this. No. All right. Oh, that didn't work. Sorry, let me. Okay. Yeah, I'm just getting like bad network quality. I don't know if I'm cutting out or anything, but
Oh,
can y'all
No,
hear me?
it's not
Hey, you
audible.
sound great.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just try it.
If your carrier was
Can y'all
more
see
cloud
it?
native, you'd probably be okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's the problem.
In the old days, I used to worry about what carrier you were on. but
Okay,
now
can y'all
not.
see it though?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, something just happened. I can't see my screen now. Great. All right.
Now,
That
Now,
doesn't work well.
now we can see it.
is it back?
Yes.
It's back, yes.
All right. I have some window is in the way. That's the problem. All right. I think I moved it. All right. Okay, here we go. So some of this we already said. So, and there's complements and stuff between what we're trying to do: service reliability, risk reduction, lowering cost, all that. That's tying in with interoperability. Make automation would be a big thing. Focus. So how are we going to do that? Would be where we are, but we're not really talking specifically about the cloud native benefits and adoption, but that would be what's driving this. I'm not going to go into that. It is important to point out to folks that it's only focused on certified Kubernetes. So Anuket is running the Kubernetes conformance, so that's good. If people aren't able to be conformant, we're not worried about that right now. We talked about these goals: open source, self-service, validates. Right, so the test suite. So the certification and test suite working group is all focused around these categories, which are covering a lot of different areas. Cloud native principles could go into a lot of different places. There's definitely overlap in everything, so this is more of how do we talk about specific practices and tests and that sort of thing. There's going to be tests in all of the categories, or there are tests in all the categories. Configuration, compatibility, all that stuff is, you could think more of the lifecycle management type of things. And security has a whole large set of tests, and you could group it into a lot of things, but you could also put security everywhere else. But again, it's just, what is the area of concern so that we can drill down and look at a practice or a test is the idea with these. The test suite is, besides writing directly, I guess, new code, which would be similar to some of the things that we've seen in, say, RC2 and maybe other parts of Anuket. There is new code, of course.
One question about the previous slide. So are these best practices are in line with the CNF working groups best practices, or these categories are used there also somehow? What is the connection between these two?
Yeah, so I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but the idea is similar to Kubernetes conformance, and I would say in general, open source technology, how it comes about, you'll have the need and there's some problem and some pain that you need to deal with. And after some discussion, you usually start having the software built. So we had Kubernetes before we had the testing, and then there was more and more and more test coverage. I mean, some people may write tests at the start, but for a while there was low coverage as far as E to E on the APIs, and it built up more and more and more until they were able to say, now we have a set that's large enough that we can build a conformance around this for interoperability between Kubernetes distributions. At this point, as of today, they have a much higher coverage of every API because they've had a big effort on that over the last year and a half, 2 years to have a big increase. Similarly, the test suite is working on providing coverage for existing applications and existing practices that we're already seeing with applications that are being used, and so working directly, it's already building that out. The certification program is building on top of that, and likewise the working group. So the working group, those sort of things, and if you go look at Kubernetes docs today that cover lots and lots of things, well, they didn't come first. They came after, years after sometimes, APIs and features were in Kubernetes. They might have been small notes and code, they might have been somewhere else, but now we have rich documentation for Kubernetes. The CNF working group is working to build, ideally and at some point, rich documentation around the best practices, the use cases, and user stories. But that sort of thing lags behind because we need to get more and more input on, is this clear? Oh, you talk about it in this way. Let's make sure we have a reference so that someone coming from that view understands as well. Oh, you focus more on this. Okay, well, let's add some use cases for that. So it's supplemental documentation that is supporting the certification and the best practice test suite work. Does that answer? I know that was a lot, but hoping that.
Yeah, that answers. Thanks.
All right. So we have some projects that are directly utilized either for testing example type. We built some stuff out that we can test. So this would be similar to having little examples that I've seen in Anuket or big examples. And then there's stuff directly used as part of the testing. So Falco for some of the security stuff is used, Kubescape security, that sort of thing is directly in for some of these where these are already focused on how to test various aspects of applications running on Kubernetes. And we have contributions from folks in the community, like Litmus for chaos resiliency availability type testing. Armo does security testing, and they have a project that's being submitted to the sandbox. And we have other projects that are doing various things in the community. And then we've had contributions from various vendors and service providers. Although some of that you may not see in the test in the GitHub, just like I'm sure in a lot of the Anuket code base, where you have people working together, but maybe only one person ends up with the commit, so you only see their name, but there might have been, several other people helping to push something through. I think we may have shared this before, but I guess it's important to bring it up again. And for everybody that can get on that public Slack, if you got to create another account, there is a working group Slack and a test suite Slack, in addition to weekly meetings for the working group. and the test suite. The test suite contributor meeting is more technical focused, so this would be an area of collaboration, I think, with the RC team in Anuket. If there's a desire to do further integration in the testing like we did previously, then we can talk there about integration issues or whatever, or maybe if there's like contributions, bug fixes, or anything either direction, that would be another place. And then of course the working group for talking about, you know, new best practice ideas, use cases, user stories. And this was mentioned at the start of the call, but just say again, we got, I think there's 10 days right now for CFPs, so if anyone's interested, that's it. So that's a, I guess,
Okay.
overview of the certification program.
Thank you very much.
I'm not
Any
sure how
comments
to
or questions?
unshare. Did you unshare? Thanks, you did it.
In the top right corner, there is a small rectangle.
There you go.
Yeah.
You figured it out.
Okay, got it.
Can you send us a link to the presentation so I can put it to the notes of the meeting?
Yeah, sure. Get back over there. We'll get that.
Thank you. Okay, so and one more question about the connection between the certification program and the CNF test suite. So is the certification program like requires the execution of all tests in the test suite, or there is a step in between, like in case of Anuket Assured, we have a, let's say, a selection of test cases?
My audio actually cut out on this side just a little bit. Were you asking, is there going to be a subset of testing, or was there something else?
The question was that if the CNF certification program uses all tests in the CNF test suite, or there is a body which selects a set of test cases which are part of the certification program.
Oh, okay. So within the program, is there a group trying to help decide on the tests that will be included for the certification?
Mm-hmm.
Was that a question?
Yes.
Question? There is no official group yet, but it's something that we've talked about pretty early on. It's, I would say, unofficial that we've been bringing it forward to several different places. Like we'll be bringing it again to the working group soon to talk about here's the progress, here's all of the tests right now that we're looking at for the certification. So some discussion around that. We're also getting input from directly from like people that were involved in the Kubernetes conformance, different key people there, and talking with vendors and service providers. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Are there any further comments on questions about the certification program and or in general the CNCF telecom activities? If not, then I would propose to discuss a bit about the technical areas of possible collaboration. So as I think it was already mentioned in the meeting, there could be a connection between the CNF test suite and RC2. And if I understood correctly, Taylor, you were working in RC2, so it can run tests from the CNF test suite, right?
Yes, Cedric was able to get it integrated and running with the initial, I guess, example that we had, and he did some further work with some testing in addition to the RC2 pipeline. But
I think those are largely focused on the infrastructure side, though, and less on the workload, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
yeah,
As in completely, I believe.
Mhm.
Which we all know is very important. But yeah, given that the topic of this call is CNFs, yeah.
So the work that Cedric did was the initial stages, and we were discussing getting some of the application workloads that were being a target for testing on Anuket. We were wanting to be able to test those with the CNF test suite, and so at the time there was some initial testing with the CNF test suite using an example it had, with the goal of eventually testing applications that Anuket was already thinking about. I can't remember the specific ones that were discussed, but they were ones that had been used I believe they were used as part of RC1. R1. I guess it'd be RC1 as well.
Yeah, and that's all the VM and OpenStack based testing as well. So if it's from anything R1 related, R2 is our Kubernetes.
The idea, Heather, was to take whatever. There was a couple of applications that were pointed out that were already working on Kubernetes. So the idea was to
reuse some of the things that had been done in R1 that could applications that also could run in a cloud native environment.
Yeah, and it feels like there was like a switch and a bunch of other things that were tied into it. I just can't recall the name. They had an open source project.
I think if we are talking about some of the applications that run standard in the R1 workflow that are used really to prove out the infrastructure, there is a virtual IMS from Metaswitch. There is a virtual EPC from Open Air Interface Alliance. And I believe another virtual EPC from another open source organization. And then as well, I believe the vPing sample VNF that we created within Anuket for a basic network connectivity throughput test, and another virtual sort of network tracing type test. And certainly the last two would be, validating network connectivity using standard IETF protocols would be very much applicable to both. Whether the IMS and EPC translate, I think, kind of depends on OAI's and Metaswitch's plans for those applications to become cloud native. And I know I have some insight into both of those roadmaps, but not complete.
So I remember that Metaswitch IMS was one of the ones that Cedric and a few of us were looking at for testing, and not because that was the one that we were trying to make sure was passing, but it was more of, is this one that is already being tested that we can validate is going to work with the test suite before we start testing even more applications.
Yeah, to validate it kind of works with the test suite and the test framework. I just don't know that via IMS application actually ever migrated from a VM based to fully containerized, and from there to fully implementing cloud native principles. So, to the extent that it could fully prove out, like a full pass list, not sure, but I completely get where you're coming from, and we just went down a rat hole as I started inventorying from the memory banks of my mind.
Yeah, Heather, unless things changed at the time right before we paused on workloads for R2 to have a pause and focus on the infrastructure, we had said, well, it looks like this is a dead end because the project is no longer being updated and may not be maintained. Now, maybe that changed, but at the time it looked like they weren't going to go further on the open source side of that. So anyways, it doesn't matter. We just need to pick something that we're happy with, but we can always continue to collaborate directly on RC2 and use some of the examples that we have, and then just until we can pick other ones to start adding in.
And you have a set of example applications.
Yeah, we have some examples, and of course y'all may have something. I think back in specifically talking to you, Gergely, over in well, I can't remember. Somewhere we were in some country all together meeting up, and we talked about y'all may have potentially come up with a few small sample, like very minimal pieces that focus on one area. It's not trying to do everything. It's only trying to do, like, you could think of it as a component. If we were thinking of VNFs, it would be a VNFC, just one component that can be tested on its own. Now, of course, that concept doesn't work well on the cloud native side. So we're really saying standalone application pieces that we could try. But anyone that has something, we could look at testing. And of course, we can look at testing non-open source applications as well, which we're already doing.
A quick question to the Anuket testing and TSC folks on the call. And I apologize, I don't know the answer to this question, but we did have a sample VNF project that was sort of doing what we're just describing from a VNF perspective. And I believe at one point I'd sort of heard that they were looking to transition to also doing, basically sort of some sample apps to test the testing, to test the infrastructure. Has that happened? And what's the activity level in the sample VNF project? And is that something that we might want to bring up as a TSC level discussion in terms of something that could potentially be useful and necessary for us moving forward?
Yeah, hi, Heather, it's Al. Very quickly, sample VNF is mostly about the test traffic generator procs, which is part of the project.
Okay.
It has the capability to emulate some forms of, sort of workload, but mostly just like plain old networking workload, and like switches and IP
Right.
address swappers, stuff like that. The folks that are working on it are sort of at a very low level. They're kind of individual contributors now, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And I don't think we can. I don't think that they've been successful in the directions you described. Thanks.
Okay. Well, so then it might be another, maybe, I don't know, with some of them and Al, your insight and guidance, and maybe at the TSC, just this concept of some sample applications that require a little bit more high level, but traffic generation behind them is obviously useful in its way as too. But maybe that's another topic that we should not attempt to fix right now, but could be on an action item list for something that could be useful to do if folks find it so.
Yes, I think that is something what we should discuss at least in the TST. Okay, cool. We also discussed a bit that maybe RA2 should look into the test cases already defined in the test suite, and that is in progress. I promised RA2 to do that, but I couldn't finish it yet. Are there any technology areas where there is a collaboration possible?
Yeah, and I'd actually, Jeffrey, just partially because of what you said at the beginning of the call, with saying that there are a lot of work items that you'd like to see addressed as sort of across groups. Do you see gaps here that you'd like to see someone sort of raising their hand to help with? So apologies if I called you on the spot when you weren't immediately volunteering, but I think it's very useful to have this sort of like what would be ideal and then, how we can serve.
I think we're off to a good start. I mean, honestly, if you look at like what a lot of the initial like user stories and kind of just like focal points in the CNF working group, a lot of it has to do with like the life cycle. I mean, we always get so bogged down into how do I accelerate, packet performance in an x86 box that we forget that people have to still just deploy the software, do updates to OpenStack, updates to VMware, manage Kubernetes. So I would say long-term, what I'd like to see is this to evolve into where these test pipelines actually kind of form the basis of like, open source CI/CD that the NCSPs could consume themselves. But that's kind of like a stretch goal. I think for now, just focusing on how do we get a sensible, vertical stack put together, giving people like the litmus test of is this software crap or not is a good start. But ultimately where I think it should evolve to is like the two groups working together on like, how does this really translate into something that you can consume as a CSP beyond just, here's a little gold sticker at the bottom of this slideshow that says this CNF works.
Yeah.
You gotta make sure what you're producing on both sides is going to encourage adoption. I mean, that's key, and performance tends to be the thing that everybody points to, but I think there's other ways for us to get leverage here. So
exactly. And we tend to be very technically centric from like a user and stuff like rarely do I see product people in here, rarely do I see like sales people in here, etc. Like we have to start convincing the industry too that there's real ROIs attached to this, right? Like that's always the big fear is like, I mean, I know we have Intel rep in here, like, do I go to like the newest proc? Does it really give me this 100% boost performance? Like, why can't I just use what I have now? Figuring out like how people actually either save money or make money off of this is something that I think both groups should be trying to pitch, because that drives to what Scott was talking about at adoption, right? If I think I can make money or save money on this, I'm more likely to adopt it.
Yeah, that's absolutely the hook. And I think over time, you're going to see more and more organizations, the leadership of more organizations also recognize the intrinsic social value associated with what we're trying to accomplish. But that's down the road. You got to get to get them hooked. You got to talk money. That's the unfortunate reality. So, and I applaud what you were saying about, we tend to be a lot of very technical people talking about things when it could really help for us to have some people that are into the marketing and product management side of things be able to help drive at least the messaging associated with what we're doing. So
Yes, agreed. Okay, we are getting close to the top of the hour. What I would propose is that we will discuss in the Anuket TSC these possible collaboration areas, and let's have another call to discuss the result of that discussion, and then the last two items what I put to the agenda. How does that sound?
Can I go ahead?
I'm good with that. So yeah.
Yeah. So in addition to what happens with the Anuket stuff, because y'all have a lot more insight and actually a lot more activities, so y'all may see many areas that I wouldn't know about for collaboration. I do want to encourage that some folks, and it may be that y'all talk with colleagues or whatever that would be more appropriate, but some folks join the working group meetings, and the areas are coming forward with concerns, as Jeffrey was keeps talking about, like here are concerns that we have and problems, so then how do we look at resolving those? And then the other would be, we have ideas and we want to share them, and we want to make sure that it goes down in that base level. We need to do that. So if we have people that are coming in and actually say, well, here's our actual experience. We've been migrating. We've had to change all these things. And here's problems that we had and how we solved them. And then we keep updating. So that would be around use cases and then potentially best practices. And then the final thing would be if someone has specific ideas for new tests. We would like to see some more testing in some of those categories. Security and reliability are great. We can keep adding tests. We have already a lot of tests there. And it would be nice to get more in some of the other areas. One of them that we're trying to get more into would be state, for instance. So if one of these categories or a subtopic within a category is somewhere where you're passionate about or you're having lots of problems, then come over and talk with us so that we can look at how to solve those.
The state example is a good one too, because that's going to be a topic / domain that really kind of goes into both sides of the equation, the platform and infrastructure side versus the application side. Like, how is the application managing state, but then how is the infrastructure protecting state? You know, are you replicating state? Like, do we try to wean people off of state? I mean, here's the thing, routing tables are a thing. We're never going to get to quote unquote stateless. So how does the infrastructure and the application work to manage state in a manner that, you know, is sensible and can withstand the rigors of the ephemeral cloud world?
Yeah, I'll add to that, Jeffrey. When you say we're not going to get rid of state and we're going to have routing tables, it would be not just saying we're going to have them, so make sure they work. It'd be like, what are we trying to accomplish with this? And is there anything that we even need to push back on, you know, all the way to Kubernetes core to say, here is the problem that we're solving with BGP, whatever else, and can you help here to make it easier for our lives there?
Awesome. I got to run, friends. I will chat with you soon.
Hey,
Thanks for setting
Gergely.
this up, Gergely.
Gergely,
Yeah,
before you
thanks.
drop,
Yeah.
before you go, I'm looking at your 2 line there and I don't see my name. Can I please be added to the list?
No, okay.
I think he literally means make sure he gets the email.
The email, yeah, the 2
yeah.
line of the email.
Ah, yeah, okay.
And me too, Uli.
Perfect.
And one
Awesome.
thing I just kind of also wanted to say really quickly as we go, we did bring up sort of onboarding and stuff like that. And I know that that has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people in a lot of different contexts. But we might want to ensure that we have maybe next time we get together as this group, someone from the own, although I think I saw, oh, I do see Randy here. Never mind. We do have someone from the ONAP CNF task force. Hadn't heard you, so wanted to make sure that was there, especially as we're talking about things like onboarding. And I know it sometimes does mean something different if you're talking Kubernetes versus some of the ONAP sort of onboarding concepts on top of that. I just want to make sure that that perspective is very well represented.
And I will send the meeting notes to the Anuket Tech Discuss meeting list also, just to be
Awesome.
sure.
Thanks, Sergey.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. I will send out then a doodle already about the timing of the next meeting, and I'm sending the meeting notes now, and I will send the meeting recording as soon as it is done. Thanks for your time and have a nice day. Bye bye.
See y'all later.
Thanks, bye.